Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Albert Wong. He is the director of the Trauma Certificate Program at Somatopia. He has served as residential staff at the Esalen Institute, was the director of somatic psychology at John F. Kennedy University, and has served as core faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies. His work is at the intersection of somatics, psychotherapy, and scalable technology. He has been featured on PBS, in Time Magazine, and in the book The American Soul Rush. He maintains a private counseling and consulting practice centered around somatic psychotherapy, and he's the founder of the online somatic education platform, Somatopia. Welcome, Albert. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, you just have such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm excited to see where this goes. And, one of the things that you are certainly an expert on is, the neurobiology of trauma. And many of us understand that in maybe an intuitive way based on our own experience or loved ones. But I'm wondering if you can explain, what is the neurobiology of trauma? What happens to our minds, our bodies, our nervous system?
No, I think one of the amazing shifts that's happened in the last 10 years or so is that this understanding of what trauma is and what it does to our bodies and our brains and our nervous systems has really kind of taken hold, and it really has made a huge difference for people just to be able to, oh, this is happening to me. Oh, it has an explanation. It's not just like weird stuff that starts to go on, because that's one of the things when people have experienced trauma, they start to experience very confusing and unusual symptoms like flashbacks or gaps in memory or panic attacks or all these things but there's a lot of research that's been done that really helps us to understand how this all works now. So there's a lot of different models for the neurobiology of trauma. I think at the most basic level is the nervous system activation model and the window of tolerance from Dan Siegel. So you can think of our brain basically as like an electrical circuit, like a very complex interweaving neural network of electrons and electricity that just kind of goes through it. And just like a circuit can be overwhelmed if there's too much kind of flow through, right? There's a way in which our nervous system can take and absorb. It has a certain capacitance, or what they call a window of tolerance, through which, we can capably traverse. So if there's too much basic nervous system activation, right? Then the classic is too much, too fast, too soon, or too little, too late sometimes, right? There's ways in which that is trauma. So that's a basic Dan Siegel window of tolerance, nervous system activation understanding. It's when our physiology, our nervous system just has almost too much nervous system activation going through it. So that's kind of just a generic shorthand, very common model. And then there's a little bit more structural understandings that have taken place, and there's a bunch of folks who have contributed here. Bessel Kolk probably has popularized this the most in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. But there's different parts of the brain that serve different functions, and you can think of like the shorthands are like Bessel Kolk calls these the smoke detector, the Kolk, and the watchtower. So the smoke detector is something called the amygdala. It's very linked to our emotional brain. It's very almost more primitive in terms of evolutionary development, and it's cued for threat, right? It like back in the day, you needed to know if you were in danger or not, right, and kind of activate your system. So there's the amygdala, which really releases a lot of cortisol. It kind of causes a real fight or flight response. So it's a smoke detector. There's the thalamus, which is part of basically the limbic system, and that's sometimes called the Kolk because it absorbs all of the things that kind of come in through our nervous system. Everything that we see, we smell, we hear, our interoception, what we feel inside. our proprioception, how we're moving. But it's this cook in the sense that it absorbs all the ingredients that we are experiencing in the world, and it mixes them all together, and then it sends those messages out into either what we call the low road, which is to the amygdala, right? In which case, the amygdala, if it sees it or senses threat, it acts very quickly. And then the cook also sends the message through what we call the high road, and that's to the medial prefrontal cortex. And that's the shorthand for that is the watchtower, right? So Bessel van der Kolk, the three are like the cook, the fire alarm, the smoke detector, and the watchtower. The low road goes very quickly, right? It's amygdala, kind of very fast threat response. And then the medial prefrontal cortex gets its messages from the thalamus, and that's the high road, and that goes a little slower. And so what the watchtower does, that's the medial prefrontal cortex. So that's more of the cerebral cortex, the higher functioning parts of our brain. So that's more geared towards assessing, is that thing that we think a threat really a threat or not? Is the fire really a fire, or is it just kind of somebody smoking a cigarette, right? Do I really have to jump into gear or not? And it takes a little bit more time, but those are the things that kind of take place. That's what gets activated in trauma. So sometimes in trauma, our smoke detector kind of is hypersensitive, right? Like it's like cued to just a whiff of a little bit of like threat or smoke, and it's like boom, right? Danger, danger, Will Robinson, right? And we just it just kind of explodes the system, and the watchtower might be trying to calm it down, but it just almost takes over. So in trauma, like the smoke detector is hypersensitive and really cued towards very hair trigger signs or signifiers of threat. The other thing that's at play during trauma is our body gets flushed with stress hormone, and there's a part of our brain that is designed to absorb experience and encode experience and then file it away, right? So, and during trauma, that system gets messed up, right? When there's a flood of cortisol, the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain which is supposed to file memories away, it basically puts a little timestamp on the memory and says, oh, this is a memory. Okay, this happened, New Year's Eve, and I know what I saw and experienced, and I can put it away and say, oh, that's a memory. And the hippocampus puts a little timestamp on it and files it away in a filing cabinet, basically. But during trauma, that filing system gets messed up because the hippocampus can't encode the memory and can't timestamp it. And so we have these experiences of intense nervous system activation that are a little bit kerjumbled, and we can't really make sense out of them, and we can't place them at a certain time. So it's almost like we feel like what was happening, we don't know that it was happening then. We don't know that it was a past experience, a past memory. It feels like it's happening now. So the hippocampus needs to experience and consolidate the memory in order to almost put it away and make it usable, rather than something that gets re-experienced like flashbacks, right? So there's so many different like things that happen, like, Broca's area goes offline. That's our ability to express ourselves verbally, right? So in trauma, what you'll find is that sometimes you can't actually verbalize, you can't get your words out, and that's physiologically valid, right? You kind of so that's another thing that happens. I mean, the basic overarching important metaphor is that the part our brain is designed to, if you imagine like a flow of electrical current that kind of weaves and bobs and flows freely, right, within the brain, it's almost like parts of it like get segmented out. They stop communicating with each other, right? It's almost like there's a fractionation of flow, and almost like there's a circuit breaker that trips, and the neural activity has to be segmented somehow. So, you know, there's ways in which all that fractionation occurs, and people dissociate and you know, can't speak. So part of the healing process sometimes is to learn to help them express themselves, right? You know, there's all the parts work, right, which is like helping people reintegrate their, you know, their different aspects of self, or reconnect to their bodies if they've been disconnected from their bodies. I mean, the literature is really vast. I mean, there's all the whole polyvagal stuff, which is very hot and hip. I know you do a lot with that too, so I feel like I worry about, you know, being repetitive, but you know, there's I mean, Stephen Porges has really helped us understand basically why, when we're in a traumatic circumstance, sometimes we can't fight back, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's a neurophysiological reason, right? It's called the dorsal vagal system. We kind of go into collapsed immobility, right? So, you know, there's polyvagal theory is important. You know, just the headlines are, you know, when we're feeling in a good state of being, when we're able to connect with other folks, we're in what we call the social engagement system. That's ventral vagal. That's a nice place to hang out in. It feels kind of typically warm and soothing and good, and there's a nice flow. So we're in basically what we call connection mode, right? And that's typically, you know, a good place to be. Now, when our nervous system gets activated, we go into protection mode. So we shift from connect to protect, and that is a different nervous system complex. That's the sympathetic nervous system, right? So kind of connection is really primarily ventral vagal. That's one nervous system complex within us, the ventral vagal system, and then the sympathetic is more fight or flight, and then, you know, that we go into protection mode, and if we can't protect ourselves, then we go into we basically eject, right? So we go from connection to protection to ejection, which is basically dorsal vagal, sometimes called flop and drop, right? Our body goes limp. We can't sometimes talk. We can't defend ourselves. We dissociate. We faint. You know, and that's a hardwired neurophysiological response. Nothing to be ashamed of, and really just that understanding of the polyvagal theory. I think that, you know, it's really taken such hold because it explains people's behavior that they think is odd or strange or they don't understand. It's like, oh, yeah, it actually makes sense that I did that. It makes sense that I always get scared and run away from connection or relationships, or I always or I wasn't able to defend myself, or I have these rage attacks that I don't understand. Well, maybe that's trauma, and maybe there's a neurophysiological explanation for it, and maybe there is a solution also, right? Maybe the solution is decrease activation, you know, come back to presence, return to safety and connection, and then maybe you can rediscover your safety and your flow. So I think it's a great time that we're in right? Almost the golden age of neuropsychology and these new understandings. I also want to say that, like, the neurophysiology is really important, and I sometimes think, like, psychologists, people in the helping profession, sometimes have a little bit of like physiology envy, right? That that part of what's healing is just the connection, the simplicity, the presence, the being. And you don't need to know the fancy language just to feel like, somebody's with me. I feel safe, right? I mean, there's a whole neurophysiological explanation. There's mirror neurons. There's like, we're both dropped into our ventral vagal system. We're co-regulating, like we're flowing in this kind of shared collective resonant presence, which is beautiful. And it's two people with each other being, and being not alone together. And that can be enough, right? So, I'm of two minds. I mean, I think the neurophysiology is great. It's good to know. It's important to understand, right? Just so you have your roadmap. But don't forget the poetry, right? Don't forget the poetry of being together with another human being, and let that be its own thing that you drink in, right? Yeah. So yeah,
absolutely. I think it's I know from my own experience with this science background, this experience designing health curriculum, and it's like my brain, I just so latched onto polyvagal theory and understanding the science of trauma and the science of our nervous system. And because for me, I was like, oh, this explains what I've been going through. And now I don't feel broken now that I understand it. And yet you can understand the science and still struggle.
Totally.
And in a way, it can be soothing to our minds, and yet it doesn't actually change the patterns. And that the therapeutic relationship, whether it's with a therapist or just another, is like, that's where the healing actually happens.
Totally. There's a saying that one of my teachers had, which was like, understanding is the booby prize, right? It's like, okay, I understand this. Okay, now, but you have to actually experience it. You have to like feel it, like with another person or in your own being and body, and then that's the real goal. Right.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to zoom out because, you're trained as a psychologist, and, I mean, I took a lot of psychology classes in undergrad, but somatics was not a part of those classes.
No, not
the
really.
field wasn't as public as it is now, but I'm curious about your journey from more traditional psychology and psychotherapy to somatics and focusing on trauma.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess there's this saying in psychology sometimes, like, research is me search, and I think that was some of the case for me. I was very in my head. I probably smarter than for my own good, right? I was very cognitively weighted and heavy. I probably still am, but it really wasn't solving the important questions of life for me. Like, how should I live? What's important? What do I want? What do I feel? I didn't even know how I felt, and so I think my journey really begins with confusion and suffering, and maybe a little bit of desperation. So I would, the world that I knew growing up was the world of science, and there's a certain beauty in and elegance in math and physics. And my father was a physicist. He named me Albert, I think, because he probably wanted me to be like Einstein. But so I was very science, and it was elegant, and there was an aesthetic, and there was a hole inside me that felt like it didn't touch or fill for me. And I tried to listen to that and sort through it, and I tried to understand it with my mind, like what is this confusion, this hole? And I couldn't. I, lists of pros and cons about what should I do or what, and it just didn't really answer anything. And eventually I found out about this strange place on the coast of California in Big Sur called the Esalen Institute. And it seemed, I didn't really have a full explanation, but it was one of those places where when I read about it or read who had gone there, it was an illustrious set of people. Some of my heroes, like Richard Feynman, who was a physicist, Gregory Bateson, Alan Watts, Abraham Maslow, just, Virginia Satir, a lot of people who spoke to me at some core level. It was like, okay, there's this place in California that seems a little bit wacky, but also I feel more settled when I hear about it and when I read about the people who go there and the spirit that it is immersed in. And so I bought a one-way ticket out there and landed at the Esalen Institute. And, I think there was, 2 parts hope, 1 part desperation. I kind of pieced together my life from there. I found my own sense of somatic being and connectedness. I had kind of been going through my own dark nights of the soul and tried maybe some traditional methods and some good people. I bless the folks who helped me and tried to help me along the way. And there was something about sitting with this really strange thing of the felt sense, what is happening inside me in my body, that felt like, well, that's a very peculiar practice that these people at Esalen are doing. Basically Esalen, everybody at Esalen, well, not everybody, but it's very ingrained within the culture to tune into your body, right? And it seemed like, well, that's a very odd thing to do. And I tried it. First time I tried, I felt really flooded with shame, like I didn't do it well. And then the second time I tried it, there was a lump in my throat, and then I just broke down crying. And it was strange and bizarre and confusing, and but there was something there, something important. And so I really dedicated the next stages of my life to recovering this connection with this very precious vessel that I had been entrusted with, my body, but which I'd really kind of disregarded or neglected for so long. And it was like a gradual process of coming home into myself, rediscovering my own voice, my own safety inside my own skin. And I would say, I think of Esalen as my alma mater, right? The place where I discovered somatics and learned about it. Like, I was lucky to have, just Esalen, like there was this parade of the greats, like, teachers coming through, somatic people, and just the local people who were amazing. So that's where my education was, primarily in terms of somatics. And then kind of going to grad school, it was like, gosh, I honestly had a little bit of okay, now I know the real stuff, right? The somatics. And I'm going to go to grad school, and what are they going to teach me? Like, I've been to Mecca, right? I've been to the promised land of Esalen. I've seen what actually works. And, I was going to go to, a PhD program at the University of Tennessee. I'm from Tennessee. And the people there are just going to be these CBT kind of people. They're probably going to want to put me into an experimental cage like a lab rat and just like kind of feed me little nuggets of bread on my way through grad school. And I'll just say, they might not have called it somatics, or they might not have said that they were talking about emotions, or they might not have said that they were talking about resonance. But, even the people who were the most like, I'm a behavioral activation person, I just think behavior is what we need to do and focus on. Like, when you actually saw them like do the work, there was resonance, there was attunement, there was kind of co-regulation, kind of almost attuned breathing, right? They were doing it, but maybe even not knowing that they were doing it, or not naming it as kind of a crucial element in the process, right? So I think there was a way in which this superiority complex that I had about somatics as the one and only truth became more inclusive, right? Like, there's good people doing important stuff, and maybe it's called by different names, but it comes from the same river, right? People are trying and caring, and so I will say that mindfulness, when I was in grad school, had started to take the academia by storm. It's like, from being like this kind of fringe, like, oh, people are doing transcendental meditation and like joining some strange cults, right? It's like, oh no, kind of best of breed clinical psychotherapies were all what they called third wave. CBT was all just mindfulness based. DBT, ACT, cognitive based mindfulness, mindfulness based stress reduction. All of these things were like taking the world by storm. And I think kind of the body, there's mindfulness, and then there's also bodyfulness, right? So, sometimes when we think of mindfulness, just like awareness practice, but it's actually really kind of, if you do like, real breathing, noticing sensation, it's very, it's very body centric, right? There's been a little bit of a body phobia, I think, within academia. It's like, oh, body, like we've got our, fancy pantsy, kind of like thinking people, we're not like body. But I think it kind of like snuck in through the back door a little bit, at any rate. So there's good people doing good stuff. It's not necessarily called somatics, but the leading couples there. I mean, like, I would say, in my opinion, almost all of the leading technologies nowadays incorporate some sense of affect or feeling in them, even if they don't name it, right? Gestalt, right? If the leading brand of couples therapy now is something called emotion-focused therapy, which is basically rebranded, in my opinion, rebranded Gestalt. Les Greenberg, who was one of the co-founders of EFT, is a former Gestaltist, and so sometimes things are renamed, rebranded, but they fall from the same river. I think I was after University of Tennessee, I came to the Bay Area, and it was funny, like this super psychoanalytic training director, and Olive Volovich. Anyways, I discovered right after, she was a force of nature, but after she passed away, there was a circle of us who gathered. She was an amazing clinician and supervisor, but I discovered that she had actually been to Esalen and had been a massage therapist, which was like, what? Are you serious? Right? So no wonder, because she spoke in such an embodied way. Kind of her interpretations were just packed such a felt punch. So I think there are kind of like the rebellion is alive and well within the field of academia, and maybe it's not as socially you don't get as much street cred if you're doing like somatic work. At least within academia, you get a lot more street cred, just in the general clinical world. But I think there's a lot of people who believe in it, even if they don't shout it from the rooftops. And then I think somatic programs, there's more and more and more of them. Like it used to be, the only places you could go were, CIAS, JFK, maybe Naropa. Yeah, Naropa. And there's like a proliferation of places, and places are starting just to incorporate somatics into their training. It's become, instead of just fringe, it's become much more leading edge type stuff. So and especially with trauma, that's where it's at, right? That's where the conversation is happening. Like if you talk to anybody on the street, right, and nobody who is a client is looking for prolonged exposure, which as a clinical intervention is like, please, does anybody practice prolonged exposure, which is supposedly the best of breed according to APA evidence-based treatments? Like nobody. Like, are you kidding me? Right? Like how did I get my trauma in the first place? Right? The reason those trials are so high is because like the dropout rate, it's just so, it's like the only people who survived were the people who kind of didn't get traumatized. Anyways, but yeah, like if you look at the leading, like what the people want, right? Yeah. It's like EMDR, brain spotting, somatic work, right? Some variation. And those are all like things that use physiology in the body and regulation. And, so it's you can call it what you want, but, I think you can't leave out the body. And I think the body, acknowledging it, is important. And it, it's what, in my opinion, really has more lasting impact. It's like things that have traction. It's like you soak it into yourself, into your whole being, not just trying to cancel your way out of a negative thought. Yeah. So
yeah. Just try to change those beliefs without changing the real nervous system response behind those beliefs.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, you've touched on this in a few ways, but really that it's that connection, it's that resonance. Yeah. So can you talk more about this idea of embodied connection and that, like, sure. I mean, even, I don't know if folks even know what the concept of resonance is or attunement.
Yeah. Well, like many things, I think the concept of resonance is, if you think of it like in terms of physics, like if you take a tuning fork, right, and it's tuned to one note over here and another tuning fork over here, and you hit one tuning fork, the other tuning fork will start to kind of resonate, even if they're not touching, right? And so it's the idea that it will start to vibrate at the same frequency, just by the presence of another thing that is at that frequency, right? And you can sometimes see this with people, right? They're at your wavelength, right? They're at your vibration, like your vibrations sync up, and you can really feel it sometimes even without words. It's like, you're here, I'm vibrating at a certain kind of emotional space, and your tuning fork can feel that, and it can start to vibrate too, right? And so there's this whole thing of like starting to attune and feel and connect, and resonate. And it's one of the most nourishing things that can happen, because like as kids, what we need is a caregiver who has at least some measure of attunement with us, like who's present at least part of the time and can resonate with us, and so we can feel like we're not alone, that they're with us. And especially when we're in our own states of nervous system activation, where it's like this is spilling over, this is too much, they can attune with us and help us feel that experience and hold that note together, right? Hold that experience, right? So the idea of embodied connection is, what does it mean when somebody is with me, is resonating with me and feeling with me, right? It's like I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel felt, right? And this experience of, okay, I'm with somebody who is feeling what's inside me. I can actually feel that they can feel me. It's like, oh, what a beautiful experience. And I feel connected with you, and I feel connected not just as an idea, but in my whole body and being. And it's such a sweet thing and such a healing thing to know that I can be not alone. I can be seen. I can be connected with, maybe even loved or protected or held, right? So it's one of the most nourishing things. It's also one of these things that's also can be quite terrifying for people, right? You know, especially if your experience with early caregivers or attachment figures has been complex or mixed. Sometimes we start to get scared when we begin to feel a little bit of connection. It's like, oh, this is actually nice, but I know that when it's been felt nice before, the shoe has dropped, right? Something has happened. And so, you know, I think we all long for that deep connection, that feeling of resonance and being, and it's also really, really scary sometimes, especially if we've had some kind of attachment breach or relational trauma.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, it's so interesting because our nervous systems really do anchor to other nervous systems, and there's this concept that like you are the average of the five nervous systems you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And so what can happen is like if you're anxious, you seek other anxious people because that's your resonance that feels familiar, and you guys can all, you know, you might not feel good, but like it feels the same.
Yeah.
And I have so many clients who, you know, our work is so healing because they realize they're like, oh, as a kid, I would feel intensely. And my parents, they were having their own dysregulation. They were maybe out of their own window of tolerance. So my dysregulation as the kid would swing them out of even more dysregulated.
Yeah.
And then I had to learn to squash down my feelings.
Oh, yeah.
I had to learn to like, you know, not reach out for help or, you know, whatever the whole cascade of possibilities, disassociate. And so that's like, yeah, that's one kind of experience of not being met with resonance, are kind of a nervous system that it has the ability to like hold your experience.
Right.
And why it is so healing to be able to like be struggling and have someone be like, I can hold you in your experience, I can feel you, and I can help you shift a little bit more into this ventral vagal regulated state.
Yeah. It's a corrective relational experience. It's like giving you and your body what you so longed for or needed. It's like somebody who could actually hold you or contain you or be with you as you were in your activated, dysregulated state, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to be alone. And yeah, I mean, I think the story that you share is really common, right? You know, your clients, people, you know, long to be seen, known, held, protected, right? And sometimes that's not present, that's absent, right? And they really need that. And having a reparative, intimate relationship, sometimes a reparative therapeutic relationship, coaching relationship, all of these things like can be vital and transformative and really help a person's body at the felt level realize, okay, maybe I can be safe, or maybe I can be seen, heard. You know, maybe my anxiety isn't too much. Maybe I don't have to be alone with it. Maybe there can be somebody I can go to hold it with me. And, you know, maybe we can be okay, you know, even if it's not easy, maybe we can be okay. You know, there's some interesting studies. I think it's James Cohen, just like studies where, like, if you're walking up a hill, if you're walking with somebody, it seems less steep, right? So it's just like, oh, actually, okay, that's interesting. Or they did an fMRI where, you know, they put somebody in it and they told them, okay, in about sometime in the next minute, I'm going to prick your foot with a pin. Their brain, it's a pin, so it's not, but their brain lit up like with fear and anxiety. And what they did, you know, with the other group was They did the same thing in about a minute. I'm going to prick your foot with a pin, but they let them hold a partner's hand, right? And their brain, right, just was far more regulated, right? Just because, okay, somebody is with me. Something's going to happen. Same thing maybe is going to happen, but it's actually, I'm not alone with it. And wow, what a difference that makes. Yeah. Mm.
It's a really powerful example.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I can feel that. Yeah. Yeah.
We're resonating.
Yeah, exactly. It's happening right now. We're like the two nervous systems vibrating and creating that. We're together. We're in this. Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah, it is. I'm curious if you have any tangible kind of the how-to of how to hold that space for someone. Let's say someone has a close friend or roommate or partner and they come home and they're super dysregulated, and it is very easy to be like, oh, and then that could ping, kind of pinball you into dysregulation. But like, and it's valid that we can't always hold space for someone, but like, what are the ways that we can try to really meet someone and hold them and create that resonance?
Yeah, good question. So yeah. So a lot of people talk about like, okay, what can I do, right, in order to help? And I think that's a really good question. And what I would say first is your body, your own body is an intervention, right? Like sometimes we think, okay, I should tell them this, or I should reflect for them, but as an intervention. And actually the first intervention is how you show up in your body and being, right? So I think the first thing would be just, okay, notice how, as they come towards you, or, how are you doing? How's your breath, right? Are you starting to feel lightheaded or tight, or is it too much for you? Because if it is, that's just something that they'll likely pick up on, right? Kind of subliminally, just they'll feel that. So what I would invite is, feel your own feet on the ground, feel the support behind you, feel the chair underneath you, notice your breath as you're with them, and feel your own enoughness, right? Feel the support around you. And and notice where in you starts to feel tight or scared or unsafe, right? And give yourself a little space or kindness or breath right there. Yeah. So I think the first thing would be, just letting yourself feel yourself and notice your body, your breath, what feels tight inside, and, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? Just allow yourself to ground and be present. When I was training at the Esalen Institute in Gestalt, we did a lot of work where, the first month of practice, all we did was we practiced breathing with the other person. We didn't say anything. We just let them speak, and all we would do was tune our breath. And it's an interesting practice because at first there can be a little bit of effort that goes with it, right? But that's not the idea. The idea is to almost maybe, just do it with soft eyes or, soft intention. And then it just kind of starts to naturally happen. Like people's breaths start to sync up, or you start to notice things when they stop breathing, and okay, you can feel that. So just starting to maybe tune your breath. There's a lot of practical things. I think, if they're in an activated state, just conceptually, you'd think, okay, well, from our little polyvagal talk, maybe they're in fight or flight, so what they might need is like to be down-regulated into connection. If you know them, just helping them be, not to discount where they're at, but just allow that, but also bring to awareness like things that are supportive or safe for them. There's a, so if it is somebody that you know, or if it's somebody that you've been working with, hopefully you've come up with some things that are safety signals for them, like resources is what we call them in the trauma world, but basically, things that help them feel safe, secure, seen, held, known, protected, and gently start to notice where they're at and help them, also notice the possibility of support around them, right? Or like if they're activated and they're in a flashback, right? Sometimes it's a visual flashback. Sometimes it's an emotional flashback. They're just triggered and they don't know why, but they're activated. Like, so sometimes just helping them, even though they're feeling that, just notice that they're maybe here with you and that, you're safe and that that was then and this is now, and in this moment that they're safe, right? That in this moment there's no threat of physical harm. Sometimes, like different people have different responses, so it's very sometimes idiosyncratic. Like you could say, oh, just do a VU sound, which is a classic thing, right? But I think sometimes it's good to tailor. Like sometimes VU is not the right sound, right? Like VU, sometimes it's, that feels better, right? So you can help work with them to find their sound that like feels good in their body. Sometimes like there's, okay, I feel anxiety in my chest. Okay, what's a chest sound? Yeah, that's just like, and you can just have them play around with it, like what feels good, right? That hits the spot. Oh, I don't know. This is a random association. I once was on teaching faculty, and there was a fellow who was away from his beloved, and he would make a joke. But just he would just say, well, you just make that sound and I'll just hold the phone right here, right? And I'll feel you, right? And it was really sweet, right? It was kind of funny, but kind of sweet, right? You can feel the sound, right? And there's certain sounds that are sometimes at ecstatic dance or wherever. Like when I go to these things, I just stand next to the speakers and just let the vibration feel. So just letting people find what fits for them, I think is really important. I think there's a lot of, like there's a prescriptiveness, and I think there's a lot more nuance in, it's not one size fits all, right? Even the classic come back to the present, like what do you see in the room? Like if the room is what's activating, it's like, oh, that's not the right intervention to make, right? So some of it's like, okay, what is the flavor of what's activating them? What is the flavor of what's safe for them? And almost like go back and forth. It's called dual awareness or oscillation or pendulation. There's fancy words people in the field sometimes like to invent, but it's basically what is activating? That's activating. What is safe? And can I go back and forth between, okay, here's activation. Yeah, got that. Here's safety. Got that. So, and there's lots of different kinds of safety signals. There's something called seeking safety, which is a very well-respected protocol. It's not typically thought of as somatic, but it's basically, there's a lot of somatic stuff on there. It's like, feel a stone and feel the texture of it, like in your hand, right? Just as a grounding thing, right? Okay, take a pebble or take a little rock and just feel it in your hand. That's a great intervention for a number of things. Like if somebody's really anxious, you want them not to pay attention to the the main line of their body, because that's where a lot of the anxiety is. Like, if somebody's having a panic attack, it's like, well, where do you feel that in your body? That actually kind of reactivates it. I feel my chest pounding. Now I feel even more scared because like I must be having a heart. Okay, so you want to kind of pull the attention away from the midline, more towards the extremities. Hold a rock, like feel the ground, or look outside, or look towards something that's soothing. It takes attention away from the somatics, right? But if somebody, right, is having a different kind of, thing that's happening, maybe it's like a visual flashback, or, who knows, right? Maybe kind of tuning into the body could be good, right? So it really depends on what's safe for them. So you need to know who your friend is, what they're working with, what their safety signals / resources are. That's really important to get to before you dive into like the trauma work. You need to find your little oases of support before you go behind enemy lines, checkpoints and safety points, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really beautiful. And, you basically described my theory of change behind my group program, Body Language Lab, which is I will teach you these concepts and I will teach you different practices for different states, but you learn what works for your body. And I can't tell you that orienting is always good for this situation. I want you to experiment and to try and to kind of walk away being like, okay, I now have a bunch of tools, and hopefully I know what works for me in different situations, which might be different than what works for this other person. And, it's like there is no one size fits all. And I mean, gosh, wouldn't that be great? Of course we yearn for that. And, many of us have probably bought programs that promise that. And then we're left frustrated. But it really is, and just also name, my work is often on building the individual's capacity to self-regulate, but self-regulation's not enough, and we need that co-regulation of that togetherness and of really just that space holding and that resonance and the like, I can fall apart and I can still be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to travel fast, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, travel together, right? It's hard to do this work alone, right? It's like you need relationship, right? Some kind of connectiveness. So, and how great, I think that sounds like a great thing that you're doing with the body language, lab, right? Just kind of teaching people like an array of tools that they can use and learn, and then find what matches for their nervous system, because the language of their body, right, might sing to a different tune, right? Like different people like different music, right? Like it's like, okay, different bodies want and are nourished by different things. So that's great. Yeah.
And your example of that VU sound can really help kind of let the energy dissipate. But what is the actual, what's the sound that your body wants to make in that moment? And, you can't just follow a script. It's like, what does this feel like? How do I let this be expressed, which is different than communicate, but it's like the innate experience wanting to be expressed.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that kind of almost circles back to like the Broca's area kind of things. Like, how do I, if I've been stuck or stopped in my expression, if that part of my nervous system has been like shut down, how do I reallow that, right? In whatever shape or form, not according to a prescriptive expression that I am supposed to do or say, but according to my own body's, soft wisdom, right? The soft animal that lives inside me that knows what it knows, right? And knows what wants to come out, but sometimes it's been scared to say it, right? How can I trust that it's safe again, or safe enough now to risk expressing, right? So, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, you brought me to the question I wanted to ask, and you've definitely touched on this, but it's like, yeah, what are the ingredients in healing trauma? We've established there's no set formula, but kind of what are some of the raw components of that journey?
Yeah. Well, I guess, for those of you who are listening, I guess the first thing is like trust yourself, right? Trust what feels good, what feels right. Trust who feels right, who you resonate with. It's a very, very specific kind of thing. I mean, not everybody, not everybody's at the same thing, right? And some people are really at it, like you really will match well with. And so what I'll say is like, listen for resonance, and trust your own inner song, right? Who, when you're with, or what, when you're with, sings inside you, right? So listen for that. I think, so there's high level, I think, find people who care about you. One of my teachers had this saying, love creates safety, safety makes space for change. Find people who seem to genuinely care about you, because there's that whatever training a person has had, that matters. Now, in terms of how to heal trauma, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think the shorthand that I would say is actually, the prolonged exposure people were wrong, but they were onto something. Okay, so it's not prolonged exposure, by which they mean like prolonged exposure to the activating thing. It's actually prolonged exposure to resourcing in the face of titrated activation, right? So that's a little bit to unpack. I'm sure you get it, Jaclyn, but let's just kind of go through that step by step. So prolonged exposure to resourcing in the face of titrated activation. Okay, so the general idea is when we experience trauma, we get stuck in chronic fight or flight or freeze or fawn states of being, the 4 Fs, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And in freeze, sometimes there's like tonic immobility, really tight freeze, or collapsed immobility, flop and drop, like my body's just goes numb, right? So each of these states are symbolic of our nervous system going into overdrive, hyperactivation, or hypoactivation, which is like after hyperactivation, hyperarousal, there's hypoarousal. They're both different levels of like going into the red zone and then going into the blue zone. They're different levels of like overwhelm, right? So basically what we want to do is we want to help a person get unstuck from their overwhelmed chronic states. People start to live inside fight or flight or freeze or fawn in their world, right? People in fight mode, like those are the people who have challenges with anger frequently, or very combative folks. People in flight mode, frequently hyper anxious, right? Scared, right? Need to get away or need to be hyper vigilant against threat. People in freeze, at least the collapsed immobility, very frequently that's depression, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to do anything. And those are frequently like trauma responses. And fawn is a personality kind of choice, right? Where it's an interpersonal choice about pleasing and appeasing somebody who you perceive to be a threat, right? So the general idea is these are all, when our nervous system gets activated, we go into one of these states, and what we want to do is work with the person to help them feel safe enough so that they're maladaptive trauma response, their survival style, can unwind a bit, and they can, what they call, complete the arousal cycle and come back into regulation. So the idea is people get caught or stuck in fight mode, and they perceive threat all around because maybe in their original traumagenic circumstance, there was somebody where there was a threat, and they wanted to fight back, and they tried to fight back, and they couldn't succeed in fighting or completing or succeeding then, and it just is stuck with them, right? And so they're constantly on the lookout for threat in the world, and constantly trying to complete their incomplete arousal cycle. They're trying to win the battle that they lost, right? And so part of what we need to help support them in is get them into a safe enough place, right, with enough support and resources, where this time they can experience the titrated activation. So just a little kind of whiff of the activation, okay, the remembrance of maybe the moment, whether, and that's a whole other thing, explicit or implicit, but where there's a whiff of the experience, but this time it gets to complete, right? This time they're able to defend themselves successfully, whereas before they were not, right? I think you can sometimes see like the model mugging where if somebody's been mugged or physically assaulted, there's a experience where the person gets to defend themselves or learns how to defend themselves, and that can actually be very empowering and cathartic and complete what was incomplete, right? It becomes a corrective, reparative, relational experience, sometimes in a corrective emotional experience, corrective somatic experience, right? They're able to take the action that they weren't able to take. So finding the incompleted action and completing the action, right? So, sometimes if somebody's in a car accident, they wanted to protect themselves, they wanted to turn away, but they couldn't. Their head gets stuck in a certain position. So just letting them complete that protective thing and letting them have the experience of protecting themselves, or letting people have the experience of being able to run away, right? To successfully flee when they before couldn't, right? That can be a completion of the arousal cycle. So helping people, find enough safety. So being maybe an anchor for the person, helping them not drown in the trauma, but, being there with them in it, helping them reconfigure the narrative, right? Rescript it if they have a explicit memory of it, or if it's just a somatic experience, because sometimes memories aren't visual with content and meaning. Sometimes it's just like this sinking feeling in my gut that I get when I see a certain kind of car drive by, right? Oh, I don't understand why that is, but that's a certain kind of memory. That needs its own completion as well, right? So creating enough safety and listening to that part of us, that kind of implicit somatic sensation, and just following that where it goes. Sometimes it wants to make a sound. Sometimes it wants to kind of say stop, right? And just letting it, even if you don't understand why, right? There is, at least within somatics, this sense of trust process, follow process, get out of the way, right? Your body has wisdom, listen to it. All it wants is for you to take the time and listen, and it will tell you, if you're patient enough, where it needs to go. So, and listen from a place of, whatever, like the 8 C's, or this sense of like calm, curious, compassionate, clear being, right? Where you're with you in a way that's relatively kind or loving.
Thank you. That's a
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful answer. And yeah, building that self-trust of what's here. And let's just honor that. Let's
Yeah.
let it move to completion. I don't need to fix it. Don't need to bypass it. There's an organic intelligence. Mm.
Totally. Totally. Absolutely. And that's actually the name. You probably know Steve Hoskinson's body of work, the organic intelligence
Mm.
model. And yeah, there is an organic intelligence within us, right? That's there if we only listen. Like, what's that saying? I think it's um, the universe is as close as the pulse in our neck, right? Yeah,
Mm.
it's like it's right there, right? It's like all the wisdom is right there if we just hold it and listen to it. So,
Mm.
yeah,
I love that. I
yeah.
love that. Well, and so your organization has a trauma certificate program. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. It's coming up pretty soon. So we start August 22nd. So yeah, real soon. And yeah, super excited. I used to run a trauma certificate at John F. Kennedy University, and it was a beautiful program. And I wanted to share it with more folks. And so I rallied our top faculty from that program and then added some real, I don't know, like superstars. And it's a beautiful program. I love what we've created. It's a 3-month program, and we treat trauma from both the bottom up, which is a shorthand for saying like listening to the body and the wisdom of the body as a guide, just like we were talking about. So it's the bottom up, but it's also from the inside out, right? Because sometimes part of what trauma does is it separates our bottom from our top, by which I mean our body becomes broken off from the rest of ourselves, right? We dissociate, we go numb. And part of healing is about opening that line of communication again. And so we need to work bottom up, listening, to what our bodies have to say. And another thing that trauma does is it splits our insides from our outsides. Like we become unable to express or share what's happening inside. So like we get cut off inside out. So part of the training is also learning how can we creatively, authentically express what is true inside me. So there's both a somatic component to it as well as an art therapy, expressive arts therapy approach to it, where you're learning to, okay, there's something inside that I haven't been able to share or talk about. But maybe I can start to do that. Maybe I can start to live out loud. Maybe I can start to create and express in safe enough ways and true enough ways, and so that what's been held inside from trauma for so long can start to emerge outside. So it's a lovely program. We've got a dream team of faculty alongside Sheila Rubin, Brett Lyon. They have a new book coming out from Sounds True on healing shame, and they're on faculty. Ruella Frank, who I adore, Michael Clemens, who's magical, Sue Martin, deep work in somatics. Has worked at domestic violence shelters for women. A lot of Mariasha Katz, all amazing folks. Come on, expressive arts. Trained clinician. So yeah, really, really super excited. People from all over the world. It's an online program, and yeah, just so moved by what people say when they come through. Yeah. So yeah, if anybody out there is interested, you can probably still sign up, and would love to have you join.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah, and
Yeah.
how can people stay in touch if they want to learn more about your work?
Yeah. So my main website is Somatopia. So you can somatopia.com. So you're welcome to check that out. There's a bunch of free stuff there, and different trainings that we have. And then we've also got Instagram, Somatopia, so you can visit me there, and YouTube. So I think there'll probably be some links in the show notes. But yeah, I'm on the regular with the regular suspects of places you can find people. It's always challenging for me. I'm not I'm as introverted as they come, but part of my role has been to become a little bit more of a public presence in this sphere, and I'm doing it for you, right? It's like taking one for the team, right? But I do it with good intention, and so I'm out there on the different platforms. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, those links will be below. Yeah, and anything you want to share before we head into the practice session?
Oh, right. Yeah. No, it's just been really lovely to connect and to share, and you have just such a lovely, thoughtful, kind presence. I imagine that anybody who's kind of works with you is really lucky. I can sense your intelligence and your thoughtfulness and the way you see both the big picture, but have such a sweet kind of heartfulness as well, and my sense is that you've lived the work yourself too. So gotta respect that, that if there's anything, like life trains us, right? There's the training that we do, and then there's the life that we live. And so kudos to you for doing the work and to having this kind of podcast. I think it's great.
Thank you. That's very, very sweet. And I appreciate that. And this has been just a wonderful conversation. I'm excited for people to hear this.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely.
Yeah. Well, I'm tearing up at that. So thank you. It's good tears. Yeah. Well, so, optional, but is there a practice you want to guide us in today?
Sure. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Let me just take a quick, can I stretch a little? Yeah, just
totally.
At this moment, just because I think
oh yeah, we've been going at it.
So let's see, 10-minute practice, and
it can be less than 10 minutes, really, whatever you're.
Yeah. Okay, let me take a little drink and then we'll jump into it. Yeah. Wow, you weren't joking about the tears.
I cry easily, and I felt very seen.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've earned it. Yeah, it's I think nobody comes into this work. Well, anyways, nobody escapes life anyways. I'm glad that you're doing this. I think it makes a difference. So thanks. Okay, so we're probably rolling. So I'll go ahead and start. Yeah. So, so I think it's, there's a number of great practices. I think the practice that I want to share today is called resource installation. It comes from Laurel Parnell's attachment-focused EMDR, but it's basically something that you can do probably when you're in a relatively quiet space, and you have your own alone time. But later you can adapt it to multiple environments. So the way it's structured is basically you're invited to think of different figures in your life and a safe place, and we're going to do something called install them into our somatic being. It's called resource installation, and it uses a specific technique that's characteristic of EMDR, which is bilateral stimulation. There's multiple parts to it, but let's just talk about the bilateral stimulation parts. The bilateral stimulation, the idea behind it is we're trying to get some of those stuck, fragmented aspects of neurophysiology to start to reintegrate. And so we're trying to stimulate both sides of both hemispheres of the brain. And some of the classic bilateral stimulation choices are something called the butterfly hug, Okay, so the butterfly hug is holding your arms across your chest, so crossing your arms in front of your chest, where one hand is approximately touching one shoulder and the other hand is on the other shoulder. And the way the butterfly hug works is we just tap left, right with each hand, like in a kind of a 1, 2, left, right, left pace. Okay, so that's a classic butterfly hug option. And that's one version of bilateral stimulation. We'll use that in a moment. The other option that you might have, especially if you're at a work environment or a place where you can't be as visible with a butterfly hug, is to tap left, right with your hands. I'm exaggerating it for those of you who can see me visually. What I'm doing is I am patting my legs left and right with my left hand and then my right hand. A small way where you're just like using placing your hands basically on your legs and then tapping your legs left and right. And that's another version of bilateral stimulation. Okay? The last classic version of bilateral stimulation, if you need to be on the DL, is just tapping your toes left and right. So left toe, like typically heels on the ground, and then left toe, right toe, left toe, right toe, left toe, right toe, just tapping so you can feel the ground underneath you. Okay, so that's the bilateral stimulation part. So, multi-part exercise, but so that is thought to help, I don't know, like create that communicative channel across the corpus callosum and help whatever might be stuck, fragmented in one hemisphere to cross over to the other. Okay. Now, the other piece of this is thinking of a protective figure, a nurturing figure, a wise figure, and a safe place. In a moment, I'm going to invite you, the listener or the viewer, to think of somebody who is a protective figure for you, somebody who's a nurturing figure for you, somebody who's a wise figure for you, and a safe place. And after we kind of get a hold of each of these, we're going to do what we call install these resources into our body, right? Through this basically a bilateral stimulation tapping practice, right? So we don't just visualize them, we somatically experience them, like almost like we're tapping them into ourselves with our full sensation. Okay, so that's the crux of the exercise. I'll talk you through it. I know that was a big lead up, and maybe that's the instructional explanation, and maybe you'll listen to this part of the practice and just have that steady, and then there'll be the guided part where you can listen to this part and skip to this part when. Okay, all right, so with all that preparatory, we'll go ahead and begin. All right, so first, just let yourself settle into a place of relative comfort. If you're sitting, just feel the chair underneath you or the ground underneath you. Some people prefer to do this lying down. Whatever feels good for you. If you want, your eyes can be open. If you prefer, they can be closed. And I'm going to guide you through the practice called resource installation. Okay? So, in this first part of this practice, I'm going to invite you to think of somebody. They could be real or imaginary, living or not here anymore. But just imagine somebody who has been a protective figure for you in your life. Right? This is somebody who might defend you, might stand up for you, around whom you feel safe, who you could go to for support. Right? So who might that be? So think of somebody in your life, perhaps real or imaginary, who represents protectiveness, support, safety for you. For some people, this can be its own challenging aspect, especially if we haven't felt protected in our lives. So in that case, sometimes I just imagine that you might think about you, right, as an ally of yourself, or maybe a version of you that is strong or protective or kind, right? So just, you could even borrow me if you like. I would be very happy to stand in and stand by you if I could, right? So just think of a protective figure that you might have in your life. And we're going to do something called bilateral stimulation. So that's a butterfly hug or tapping your legs or tapping your toes in just a moment. But first I want you to just visualize that person. Just see them in your mind's eye. Okay? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What is their voice? Where are they in the space with you, in front of you, to the side? And see if you can use all of your sensory experiences. Maybe there's even a certain smell, or maybe there's a flavor of being with them that you can just even almost taste, right? So what is it like to see them, hear them, feel their presence with you? And once you get a sense of that, I'm going to invite you to do one of these things that we've mentioned. You get to choose a butterfly hug, leg tapping or toe tapping, and just install their presence into your being, anchoring what it feels like to be with them inside you. So we'll just tap left, right, in a cadence, a steady cadence. With each tap, just feeling them with you, almost more and more embedded into your felt experience, into your body. And just seeing them, and then feeling them, and then sensing them, almost getting tapped into you. Sometimes this is called resource tapping. You're letting their protective presence land inside you. Typically do that for 20 seconds or so. And then when you feel that kind of taking hold, I'm going to invite you to let that go for a moment, and now install or imagine. We're going to imagine a nurturing figure. This is somebody who you could go to for love, emotional care, whenever you might have had some emotional challenge. They would be there to nurture you, support you, love you, give you emotional care, help you feel loved, right? So who might you imagine? It could be a real person. It could be an imaginary person. It could be you, your own highest self. Right? Sometimes it could be a spiritual presence, right? A dear friend. So who represents care, love, nurturance for you? Right? Somebody who helps you feel loved. And as you settle on a person, go ahead and let yourself imagine them, visualize them. What do they look like? What do they sound like? What are they wearing? How does it feel to be with them? And where are you, right? Where are they in relation to you? Are they in front of you, to your left or right? Are they sitting next to you? Are they behind you? And just sense their presence and being if you can. And as you sense them, let's go ahead and next do the resource installation. So this is installing their presence and being, right? So just choosing your mode of bilateral stimulation, just letting yourself tap left and right, and with each tap almost allowing their love, their nurturance being felt more deeply penetrating into your body and your being. Let yourself feel their love, their support, their care, their nurturance land inside you. So with each tap, just imagining that this support, this resource is getting embedded deeper and deeper inside you. And just letting yourself drink that in with each breath, anchoring that presence and that being, slowly letting that. Next, we're going to invite a wise figure. This might be somebody who you might view as a mentor, a guide, who has wisdom, insight, intelligence, who can cut through things that are confusing, who can see things clearly, and can give you that perspective, that insight, that depth of knowing, and that wisdom. And so, who in your life, could be real, it could be imaginary, represents a wise figure for you? So just choose somebody to come forward, something, maybe someone or something, to represent wisdom, a wise figure for you, and just take a moment to notice that figure. What do they look like? What do they sound like? What's the quality of their voice? What are they wearing? Where are they in relation to you, in front of you, to your left or right? Are they standing or sitting? And what does it feel like just to be with them, knowing that they see things clearly, that they have insight, they have wisdom, they understand? And as you see them, hear them, feel their presence, let's go ahead and allow yourself to do your bilateral stimulation again. So go ahead and choose your bilateral stimulation method of choice, butterfly hug, tapping your legs or tapping your toes, and just let yourself tap left and right, left and right. Just letting yourself, with each tap, let their presence and being land deeper and deeper into you, allowing their wisdom to interpenetrate into your being, flowing into you, feeling it with each tap, just letting their wisdom pour into you, just allowing that to slowly fade. And last but not least, we're going to imagine a safe place. So what is a safe place for you? A place where you have maybe felt at peace in the world, loved, clear, a place of refuge where you don't need to do anything, you can just be exactly as you are. For some people, this is in nature. For some people, maybe a particular room in their house, maybe a particular couch, maybe a particular place where you visited sometimes. So where is a safe place for you? And again, just, it can be real, it can be imaginary, but just see it. What are the colors? What are the shapes? What are the sounds that you hear? Maybe what do you feel
as you're in this place and as you sense yourself in this safe place. Go ahead and one last time we're going to do the bilateral stimulation, just letting yourself tap left and right, whether with the butterfly hug, tapping on your knees or tapping your toes, right? And with each tap, just allowing your presence and being to be permeated by the safe place that you've been imagining. Just letting the sounds enter you, the sights enter you, almost letting them land inside your felt experience, anchoring the visual and the sounds into your felt experience of the body, just tapping this resource of the safe place into you. Just allowing yourself, knowing that you can return to any of these places, the safe place, the presence of the wise figure, the protective figure, or the nurturing figure, anytime you want. And sometimes doing the physical action of the bilateral stimulation can be a valuable anchor to re-evoke this feeling that might be arising in you right now of relative safety, of being protected, of being nurtured, and being graced with wisdom. Thank you so much for your practice. Blessings and...
That's a wonderful practice. I haven't done it with those different figures. That was really special.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
an oldie but a goodie, but yeah. I think it's good to it's good to do some of the resourcing basics. Yeah. So glad we got to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
I'll stop recording.